This is the Tom Bigby Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi called Columbus, and sometimes I write about the county or the rest of the state. This evening's episode is D.H. Smith from Artesia, Mississippi, February 1889, and it's about a lynching. The post-Reconstruction era in Mississippi represented a complex tapestry of economic manipulation and racial subjugation. Sharecropping emerged not as an opportunity for economic mobility, but as a sophisticated system of continued economic bondage for recently freed African Americans. Over 50% of Lowndes County farms operated through sharecropping by 1880. Landowners provided critical resources on credit with exorbitant and crippling interest rates. Under this systematic financial structure, it prevented economic independence. By the late 1880s, the Great Migration was in full swing. Looking to escape the blinding and grinding poverty of sharecropping and tenant farming, the ugly reality of post-Reconstruction Mississippi, black men and women began to leave Lowndes County headed to better opportunities. Black recruiters came to town and to the villages as well, along the railroad to encourage able-bodied workers to leave the farms and fields of Lowndes County for opportunities in the growing mills and factories to the north. Other recruiters came from large plantations further west in Arkansas, Kansas, and East Texas, offering a larger take for newly signed sharecropper recruits. Many of these became dusters. Sharecroppers were the backbone of employment for blacks during Reconstruction after the abject failure of the contract labor system immediately following the Civil War. The government promised freedmen 40 acres and a mule by breaking up former plantations into smaller farms. Instead, due to political wrangling in Congress, the Confederate-owned plantation was returned to the former slave owners. These landowners now had vast holdings to plant, but no cash and no cheap labor available. Sharecropping gave landowners cheap labor and the newly freed slaves a place to live and a theoretical opportunity to earn enough to buy their land. By 1880, over 50% of Lowndes County farms were operated by sharecroppers. In exchange for their work, families who agreed with the landowner needed food, goods, and supplies to last until their take would be allotted in December after the cotton was harvested and sold. These sharecroppers were provided fertilizer, seed, clothing, and food at the plantation store on credit at exorbitant interest rates. Their crops had to be sold directly to the landowner or his designated agent. This debt would be paid back immediately at the sale of their crop, and the high rate of illiteracy in the black sharecropper population meant they were often taken advantage of financially. This made it almost impossible for the sharecropper to get out of debt and thus remain bound to the landowner for yet another season and beyond. The rise of white supremacist groups like the White Liners and Red Shirts and the codification of black laws furthered the disenfranchisement of blacks in Mississippi. Many black families began migrating to the west, moving to Arkansas and Kansas in search of a better life. In Lowndes County, blacks had been migrating to the rich Mississippi Delta to farms like Dockery and the Heathman Plantation, among others. These farms were offering better rates for sharecroppers and promises of better living conditions. Those who left and moved west of Lowndes County hoped to find financial freedom that the Delta and beyond had to offer. Local whites, terrified of the loss of their cheap but experienced labor pool, intensified their efforts politically and financially to keep their workers, quote, down on the farm. They intercepted black newspapers from radicals like Richard Littlejohn in Columbus and others that were arriving on the trains like the Chicago Defender. These newspapers were renowned for not only encouraging the diaspora, but also advertising job listings for African Americans. The local white landowners were losing its cheap labor force faster than they could recruit replacements from Georgia or Alabama. They were living so tenuously on their estates that their existence was dependent on the sharecroppers and their continued debt. African American workers sought escape from the grinding poverty of the Reconstruction South, systemic racial discrimination, and the threat of violence from white supremacist groups. It was in this environment labor agent D.H. Smith began recruiting farm laborers to move to Arkansas. Smith, a black man from Forrest City, Arkansas, is said to visit Artesia and the local sharecroppers in early fall of 1887. He visited Starkville, West Point, and Artesia at least 2 times more before his final visit. Labor agents like D.H. Smith played crucial roles in identifying alternative employment opportunities, recruiting workers for western states, and providing hope for economic transformation for the people who lived in places like Lowndes County. Piecing together the news articles of the time, a mob of angry men met Smith at the Artesia depot when he arrived from Starkville on the train on one of his trips when he was trying to catch his connection back to Arkansas. He was stalked by at least 3 members of the crowd who shot him first in the back, incapacitating him. They then took him to a nearby tree, tossed a rope over a sturdy branch, and lynched him. According to the Oxford Eagle, 28 February 1889 edition, Smith was killed by, quote, 2 reputable citizens from Oktibbeha and 1 from Lowndes County. The 3 were charged with the crime, but no court documents have been uncovered to support the claim. According to the Starkville Times, an inquest was held. However, no one was arrested. According to the single news report, it is only another Negro killed, and Negroes don't count for much in Mississippi. That is from the Ogilvy Press, April 6, 1889 edition. An inquest was held into the death of D.H. Smith in March 1899 and recorded on page 80, Book 9 of the Lowndes County Board of Supervisors. D.H. Smith's murder exemplified the brutal mechanisms used to suppress black economic agency. Smith's murder is a symbolic representation of the systemic racial terrorism of the post-Reconstruction era of Mississippi. Smith's assassination represented a direct attempt to prevent labor migration using drastic intimidation tactics against economic self-determination. The events surrounding D.H. Smith's murder were pivotal in accelerating local northward and westward migration and strengthening the resolve of African Americans in Lowndes County to challenge existing economic power structures and begin to create pathways for future civil rights movements in the area. Smith's story encapsulates the brutal resistance to black economic empowerment, highlighting the complex intersections of race, labor, and economic opportunity in late 19th century America. I want to thank you for coming on my podcast, The Tom Digby Tales. Until next time.